Center Atlantic dedication ceremony. We are honored to have such a multitude of people here today to celebrate the contributions of Mariner Skills Training Center Atlantic, the training and preparation of our seagoing warriors, and most of all, to honor the legacy of Captain Paul Xavier Rinn. Today, you will hear from Mystic Land's commanding officer, the commander of Naval Surface Force Atlantic, and from Bradley Penniston, the author of No Higher Honor. It is now my pleasure to introduce the commanding officer of Mariner Skills Training Center Atlantic, Captain Jeff Betts. Captain Betts is a native Ohioan graduate from Miami University of Ohio. Captain Betts' sea tours were on USS Harper's Ferry, LSD 49, USS Germantown, LSD 52, USS Nitsa, DDG 94, and USS Kearsarge, LHD 3. He commanded USS Gunston Hall, LSD 44. During his tour as executive officer and commanding officer of Gunston Hall, he deployed in support of UNITAS 2018 and Exercise Trident Junction 2018. After completing an extensive yard period in the basic phase, Gunston Hall received a 2021 Battle Effectiveness Award. He assumed his role as commanding officer, Mariner Skills Training Center Atlantic in July 2022. Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Jeff Betts.
All right, good morning, everyone. Greetings and welcome to the Mariner Skills Training Center Atlantic. I would personally like to thank all of you for joining us here today as we dedicate our building in honor of Captain Paul X. Rinn. So right now, you guys are sitting in what is the most advanced ship handling schoolhouse in the world. This building represents a $173 million investment in surface warfare training. We have over 50 advanced simulators that are designed to provide the highest fidelity training to the waterfront. We train everyone from brand new ensigns who are learning standard commands for the first time, all the way up to fully integrated bridge watch teams that include CIC and the NAV team. We train quartermasters to the meticulous standards set forth by the Coast Guard, and we provide high-risk training to bosun's mates who stream cargo, pass fuel at sea, and operate the Navy's small boats. We provide the full spectrum of surface navigation and seamanship training to the entire Atlantic Fleet. I would like to thank two former SWISA commanding officers, Admiral Lex Walker, for giving me the opportunity to have command of this fantastic schoolhouse, and his relief, Admiral Brian Muddy, mostly for not firing me. I'd also like to thank Captain Andrew Roy, who recently completed his tenure as the executive officer at SWISA. Andrew was always my lifeline, my first phone call, and oftentimes pulled double duty both as my ISIC and as my therapist. I'd also like to thank Captain Ian Scalatine, who currently serves as the commanding officer of the USS Arlington, and prior to that was the inaugural commanding officer of the Mariner Skills Training Center. Let me be perfectly honest with everybody, Ian did all the hard work. He's the one that led our team in the creation of our command. I have the benefit of all that hard work. I get the bright new shiny building, but Ian is the one that got all the training off the ground, and that's what really matters. Last but not least, I'd like to thank SWISA's current commanding officer, Captain Joe Baggett. Sir, I know you haven't been on board long. I'm certain it feels like you're being shot out of a cannon, but I will tell you, SWISA represents everything that is great about surface warfare. We train, we lead, we're a learning organization that constantly asks ourselves, are we providing the fleet what they need? And if the answer is no, we fix it, we get to work, we make it better, and we take care of ships out on the waterfront. I'd like to thank Ms. Pam Rinn and the rest of the Rinn family for being so gracious with Paul's legacy. Ma'am, it has been an honor to meet you. Thank you so much for everything that you've done to help us create such a fitting tribute to Paul. I'd also like to thank Captain Retired Bill Erickson for kicking all this off. Back in January 2023, it was Bill who came forward with the idea to dedicate this building after Captain Rinn. When we put the dedication package together and briefed it up the chain all the way to the CNO, every single person along the way slapped the table and said, yes, that is perfect. So thank you, Bill. I appreciate you advocating for your best friend, and we are forever in your debt. I'd like to give another huge thank you to the entire Surface Navy Association for your support. As a member of SNA, I'm surrounded by people who I respect for their accomplished careers, but more importantly, They are people who genuinely care about the current and future generation of service warriors. So thank you to Chris Bushnell, Bob Oldani, Craig and Patty Langman, Robert Warner, and especially my dear friend and mentor, Captain Frank Castellano. Getting back to Bill Erickson. As you guys know, Bill recently retired as the executive director of SNA, an organization that both he and Paul were sincerely dedicated to. Bill has put together a video that highlights many of Paul's accomplishments while in uniform, and we're going to watch that here in a minute, so thank you again, Bill. As most of you know, Captain Rinn is most famous for his heroic actions as the commanding officer of the USS Samuel Roberts, where in 1988, while the ship was deployed to the Arabian Gulf, it struck an Iranian mine. Under Paul's leadership, the crew gained fame for their heroic actions in saving the ship without a single loss of life. While those events rightfully constitute a large part of Paul's legacy, I would like to draw your attention to his next assignment, where Paul led the Surface Combat Readiness and Survivability Office at the Pentagon. In that role, he was able to leverage his experience as a battle-tested commanding officer to build upon and improve the Surface Navy's combat readiness. Knowing full well the demands of combat at sea, Paul relentlessly championed those programs that would produce higher trained sailors and more ready warships. It is in that vein that we stand here today, and that is why it is fitting for us to christen our facility as Rinn Hall. The parallels between the time in which Captain Rinn sailed on board the Samuel B. Roberts and the world we see today is uncanny. Right now, at this very moment, U.S. Navy warships deployed to 5th Fleet are defending U.S. merchant shipping, keeping the sea lanes open, and protecting American interests abroad. We here at the Mariner Skills Training Center Atlantic have fully embraced Paul's legacy and worked tirelessly to ready seabound warriors for the challenges we know they will face while deployed. And so to close, I would like to thank the fantastic staff here at the Mariner Skills Training Center Atlantic. I'd like to thank Lieutenant Commander Ian Meredith and Lieutenant Nikki Rome, who served as the coordinators for today's events. Ian and Nikki are two of the most talented officers I have ever worked with. They're absolutely brilliant and literally thought of every single thing needed to make today a success. I'd like to thank our fantastic instructors across BDOC, OOD, Quartermaster, and Bosun's Mate schoolhouses, to include the team from LB&B and the Master Mariners who work in the NSSTs. You are all the most competent professional mariners I have ever seen, and you set the standard for the entire fleet. I am in awe of what you do every single day. I'd also like to thank our amazing support staff who processes over 22,000 students per year. I know that you guys hate it when I use my iceberg analogy, but you guys are the hidden part of MSTIC LANT that makes everything work. Students would not be able to do what they do, sit in class, drive ships in the simulators, and truly learn how to do what we need them to do on ships if it wasn't for you guys taking care of their pay problems, attending to their medical needs, helping schedule their flights, and a million other things that goes behind processing that many students a year. I cannot thank you enough for what you do. I've spent a lot of time this morning talking about the building because after all, this is a building dedication. But all of the technology that we have is great, but it is our talented team of instructors and support staff that we really need to celebrate here today. Our team is so dedicated and so passionate about the training we provide that they would do it in trailers parked in a random parking lot next to gate 3 if that was the only space that was available. And all joking aside, that was where we started, very humbly working in trailers in a parking lot next to gate 3. So my mission as your commanding officer has always been to provide you with the resources needed to maximize the vitally important training we provide. The person who has led our staff the most in that effort is our Executive Director, Ms. Valerie DeMichael. Valerie, thank you for everything that you have done and continue to do to support our mission. One final note about where we started and where we stand. When you walked into the trailer over by gate 3, posted on the wall were the names of 17 sailors. When you look above the quarterdeck in this building, you'll see 17 stars. We will never forget where we came from, and we will never forget why we are here. We walk humbly in Paul's footsteps, and I thank you all for joining us here today. Ladies and gentlemen, let's now take a look at this video.
Paul Rinn was born in the Bronx in 1946. His father was a law school graduate, and his mother was a grade school teacher. His older brother Greg, a naval officer, inspired Paul to follow in his footsteps. Paul attended Marist College in New York, where he developed his academic and athletic skills. After graduation, Paul received his commission in 1968 through the Navy's Reserve Officer Candidate Program and first served as an ensign on the USS Sarsfield. There, he diligently worked his way up the ladder and ahead of his peers to the rank of lieutenant and operations department head in just 20 months. In the early 1970s, Lieutenant Rinn was assigned as military training and counterinsurgency advisor for operations along the Mekong River between Thailand, Cambodia, and Laos, where he was involved in combat operations over 2 years. Following his Southeast Asia tour of duty, Paul Rinn served as weapons officer on USS Blakely, and after promoting to lieutenant commander as operations and tactics officer 1st Canadian Destroyer Squadron. After graduating with distinction from the Naval War College at Newport, Rhode Island, and earning his master's in business administration, Lieutenant Commander Rinn became executive officer of USS Bowen, and then Chief Staff Officer of Destroyer Squadron 36. As a result, he was promoted early to commander in 1983 and was designated to command the guided missile frigate USS Samuel B. Roberts under construction at Bath Iron Works, and was involved with her completion until commissioning in April 1986. Deployed to the Middle East in 1988 while working as an escort for U.S.-flagged oil tankers in the Persian Gulf during the Iran-Iraq War, Samuel B. Roberts struck an underwater naval mine, blasting a 30-foot hole in the hull, flooding the engine rooms, destroying the ship's gas turbine engines, and sending flames 100 feet above the ship. The blast broke the keel of the ship and severed the hull in half, leaving just the main deck holding it together. But under the leadership of Commander Rinn, the crew warned off hostile warships and aircraft, fought fire and flooding for 5 hours, and eventually exited the minefield on its own auxiliary power, saving Roberts from sinking with no loss of life. For his actions and leadership during the crisis, Paul Rinn received a call from the President of the United States and the Legion of Merit with Combat V. The actions of Commander Rinn and his crew are now required reading at the U.S. Naval Academy, Naval War College, and Surface Warfare Officers School. Following his tour on Samuel B. Roberts, Commander Rinn headed the Navy's Combat Readiness and Ship Survivability Office at Navy Headquarters in the Pentagon, and later, after being promoted to captain, served as executive assistant to the head of the Surface Navy. In 1994, Captain Rinn commanded the Aegis cruiser USS Leyte Gulf. During his command, he again deployed to the Persian Gulf and was the at-sea commander of United Nations oil embargo operations against Iraq. After the successful deployment, Leyte Gulf was awarded the prestigious designation as top Aegis cruiser in the Atlantic Fleet, and Captain Rinn was awarded the John Paul Jones Inspirational Leadership Award by the United States Navy League. Following his tours at sea, Paul Rinn served in the Pentagon as Special Assistant to 2 successive Chiefs of Naval Operations. In 1998, Captain Paul Rinn retired from the United States Navy with 5 Legion of Merit Awards, the Purple Heart, 4 Meritorious Service Awards, Combat Action Ribbon with Bronze Star, and other personal and unit commendations. In 2008, Paul Rinn was honored by being inducted into the Surface Navy Hall of Fame. After retiring from the Navy, Paul joined the international consulting firm of Whitney, Bradley & Brown. He advanced steadily through the company ranks and was an integral part of the company's growth from a $5 million organization to a $95 million company in 10 years. In 2001, he was promoted to vice president and placed in charge of international and domestic naval business development, tripling that business by 2004. In 2005, he took over leadership of the company's largest sector, management consulting, doubling both the sector's productivity and profit margins over the next 4 years. In 2010, Paul Rinn became the head of all commercial business development, again doubling WBB's market share while maintaining a profit margin of over 20%. He departed on December 31, 2011 to pursue his third career as a book author and public speaker. Throughout his career, Paul Rinn has believed in himself and trusted in his people. He has always demonstrated that if you invest in your people and lead them well, they will invest in themselves and perform brilliantly, well above the level they thought they could achieve, and in doing so, be the key to every organization's success.
It is a pleasure to join you all here today. What a great day. It is just awesome. And you know, Jeff said the word that I think that we are all embracing as a community, which is a cause, right? It's really is a pleasure to join you today. First, I'd like to welcome, this is Pamela Rinn and her family. It was a pleasure meeting you. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Your husband was just a brilliant naval officer, leader, and mentor, not only for our community, but for me. I first met him when I was Lieutenant Cahill, and I was en route to PC Command, where we talked about it this morning. I've heard his speech a number of times across my career, but it impacted me to build combat readiness of my team and to prepare them for combat, because we never know when that's going to happen. It means the world that you traveled here today to be part of this celebration. I want to welcome Admiral Engdahl, Admiral Retired Hart, and Admiral Retired Welch, and all of our warship captains, shipmates, families, and friends. Thank you for coming to acknowledge our incredible steps forward in our surface warfare community, and to celebrate the bravery, dedication, and leadership of Captain Paul Rinn. The dedication of the Mariner Skills Training Center Atlantic is much more than just the final touches on a building and the celebration of a great man. It is the symbolic end of an initial investment in vastly improved training in the true beginning of a new era in surface warfare education and professionalism. It's taken many years to achieve our current education plan and the required facilities needed to execute this high-level training necessary to continue to be the world's premier Navy. We began the expansion of our junior officer training in 2009 with the pilot class of what would soon become our basic division officer course. The waterfront quickly realized that these junior officer graduates arrived on board our warships with a much more robust knowledge base than the previous cohorts of division officers. Building on the success of BDOC, SWAS launched a series of new courses designed to add different skill sets to our division officers' toolkits, including Advanced Division Officer course and Officers of the Deck Phase 1 and 2. As we developed these courses, we realized that we needed state-of-the-art facilities to teach our junior officers. That realization was the genesis of the Mariner Skills Training Center. Today, we are standing next to years of planning, work, and dedication that will allow us to educate our next generation of junior officers and junior sailors at the most advanced levels. I can think of no better namesake for this pinnacle of surface warfare than Captain Paul Rinn. Captain Paul Rinn, as we saw, began his career in 1968 and served as a division officer in USS Starsfield. Following his division officer tour, he served on the ground in Vietnam on the gun line as a military advisor. Those early tours formed the basis of Paul's leadership philosophy and warfighting mindset that would carry him through command and into civilian life. He cut his teeth as a frigate sailor and as an executive officer. He also did an exchange tour, as we saw, with the Canadian Navy and a tour with distinction at the War College. Paul was one of those officers that ensured he had a wide range of experience, education, and expertise. All this helped him when he became the commissioning commanding officer of the Samuel B. Roberts, and then during his major command tour aboard Leyte Gulf. As the captain of Leyte Gulf, Paul was also the commander of the Iraqi oil embargo task force in the Red Sea and later embargo commander and strike commander in the northern Persian Gulf. As I'm sure everyone here today is well aware, 5th Fleet is once again a combat area, and our warships once again are executing combat deployments, defending the nation's interests, forward, visible, and ready. Captain Rinn contributed many lessons to our community, and between his 2 command tours exemplified what we look for in commanding officers during combat. Our current warfighters can look to great leaders like Paul for inspiration on how to lead their crews, not only in the Red Sea, but wherever the nation calls to execute combat. While I could stand up here and talk about Captain Rinn's tactical brilliance and damage control excellence for hours, I wanted to focus on his incredible mentorship within our community, not only during his time in uniform, but continuing through his retirement up until his sudden passing. He never gave up on anyone, even his most problematic sailors. He met with every sailor when they reported to his command, and he told them, be only the best, not only in your everyday job, but in everything you do. Now I want to tell you a story about a fireman. Many of you have heard this story of Michael Tilley. During the damage control efforts after Samuel B. Roberts struck an M08 mine in the Arabian Gulf. But I want to tell you his first story. It clearly demonstrates Captain Rinn's dedication to his people. Captain Rinn did not get a chance to sit down with Fireman Tilley after reported to Samuel B. Roberts like he had with the rest of his sailors. Because the day Fireman Tilley reported, he was already at captain's mast. The night before, the night of the day Fireman Tilley reported, he'd gone to a bar and tried to use not one, but 2 fake IDs. CMC recommended a stern talking to, which Captain Rinn agreed with and delivered. Captain Rinn was convinced he would never see Fireman Tilley for discipline again. Well, he was wrong. After a port visit in the Caribbean, Fireman Tilley was back at captain's mast for drunken behavior at a restaurant. This time, CMC recommended that they start the separation process, but Captain Rinn wasn't ready to give up. He believed that maybe Fireman Tilley needed was more involved leadership, and somehow he, as the CO, had failed Fireman Tilley. He gave him another chance. I probably would not have been so forgiving. After being given the order to sail to the Arabian Gulf, Captain Rinn put his crew on a short leave period to get everyone a little downtime for what he thought would be a stressful deployment. The only sailor to not return on time was a certain fireman. So back to captain's mast he went. But true to his nature, Paul let this fireman tell his side of the story. Paul decided to retain him and note in his record that this was truly his final shot. When Fireman Tilley took heart that Captain Rinn was really taking a chance on him, he worked hard and stepped up on deployment. In fact, he worked so hard, he was made the space petty officer for Ox Machinery Room 1. Captain Rinn recalled visiting Fireman Tilley down there during deployment, and the space was spotless. During that visit, he told his captain, "I just want to be a success. I just want to learn to do it right." Captain Rinn replied, "I believe in you, and the Navy believes in you." Without getting into the damage control efforts after the mine strike, because I'm sure we're going to hear them from Brad much better than I can tell them, just know that the end of this story is that fireman saved Samuel B. Roberts. Paul could not have done what most of us in that position. He didn't separate that fireman, and he didn't punish him harshly. Paul believed in the goodness in people and his teammates. In the end, Paul saw something in this fireman that many of us might have missed if we were not paying attention. Captain Rinn retired in 1997, but he didn't stop mentoring officers and sailors throughout the community. He was heavily involved with the Surface Navy Association, and he ran the Heritage Night every year at the National Symposium. There was work with SNA. He was contracted by SWAS to speak at every major command, prospective commanding officer, prospective executive officer, starting at the beginning of COVID. These events were many of us here today were truly impacted by Paul, and I can't overstate the impact he had across our community during those sessions. He was only contracted for an hour-long session for each class, but it was very common for those sessions to last upwards of 4 hours. He was an incredible storyteller. He pulled the audience in, he made them feel part of their story, and not only when he retold what had happened in the minefield, but in anything he talked about. His ways with words elicited incredible conversations, and every officer in attendance took something valuable from that discussion. Paul also continued to be a one-on-one mentor to many of those junior and senior to him. He mentored officers ranging from junior damage control assistants seeking advice to the SWO boss looking for somebody to bounce ideas off of. He never turned anybody away. He had a unique gift for making time for everyone and being on their level when they needed him. The impacts of his mentorship and leadership on our community will continue to be felt across the waterfront for years to come. Paul was also an advocate for the Surface Navy and many other spheres of influence. After retirement, we heard he worked for Whitney, Bradley, and Brown as the executive vice president. He continued to advocate for our community interests from his new position. And he advised Senator Susan Collins on military issues again and again, always a staunch advocate for our surface communities. His impact reached far and wide. Captain Paul Rinn embodied the ideas of a true leader and a war fighter. I can think of no one better to represent the officers we are looking for in the surface community. The surface warfare community would not be the same without his leadership, his mentorship, dedication, and bravery. To echo the ideal that he passed to his crew, Paul Rinn simply was the best. Thank you.
I am now honored to introduce our final speaker, Mr. Bradley Pennison. Bradley Pennison is the Executive Director of Defense One, a national security journalist for a quarter century. He helped launch Military.com, served as managing editor of Defense News, and was editor of the Armed Forces Journal. His books include No Higher Honor, Saving the USS Samuel B. Roberts in the Persian Gulf, which has been featured in the Chief of Naval Operations Professional Reading Program. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bradley Pennison.
Well, thank you, and good morning, and thank you for having me, everybody. I'm truly honored to talk about Paul Rinn. 36 years and a few weeks ago, USS Samuel B. Roberts was in the middle of a war. Perry-class guided missile frigate was in the Persian Gulf, where Rinn and Iraq were trying to break the stalemate on land by attacking merchant vessels at sea. Roberts had been in theater for a few months and had shepherded a few dozen of these vessels past hostile Iranian warships. On April 14, 1988, the Roberts was sailing in the main shipping channel of the Gulf when it struck an Iranian naval mine. 250 pounds of TNT detonated just below the waterline. It blew a truck-sized hole in the hull, it broke the keel, seawater rushed in, it flooded the engine room, it flooded an aft machinery space, it began to flood a forward machinery space. These are the three biggest spaces on the ship. But what was worse, the ship was on fire. The explosion had filled the engine room with super hot gases that continued on through air vents and ventilation spaces until they had set fires on 4 decks and burst through the stack with a fireball that rained bits of flaming debris on the weather decks. So, as darkness fell, things were looking grim for the crew of the Roberts. Their ship was on fire, it was sinking, it had lost electrical power, it was dead in the water, alone in a minefield 40 miles off the coast of a hostile Iran. But they faced this mortal test, well prepared and well led. The ship's captain was, of course, Commander Paul Xavier Rinn. And as you've heard, he's had somewhat of an unusual career for a naval officer. He'd served on frigates and destroyers, but he'd also served in the Brownwater Navy on the rivers of Southeast Asia. And that experience of combat up close had shaped his philosophy of command. It had seared into him the knowledge that combat would push you past all imagined limits, and that if you weren't ready, it was already too late. The duty of a combat leader, therefore, was to start early and make sure that your sailors were as ready as humanly possible. So when Paul Rinn received orders to forge the first crew of a brand new frigate, he assembled the chief petty officers of his pre-com detachment, and he said, I am not some guy who just walked out of the woods in Washington, D.C. I have served in Southeast Asia. I served off Lebanon. I served in the Gulf of Sidra. I know what it's like to go into combat. I know what it's like to face the enemy. And I know what it's like to feel that you're going to die. Now, there are no second place awards in combat, and I don't intend this to be a second place ship, he said. I want this ship to be the best in the Navy. I want this ship to be the best there ever was. He set no small goals. I want this ship to be a ship that everybody talks about, and more importantly, that everybody is proud to serve on. And he said the key is that I want every sailor who ever served on this ship to think that this is the best thing he could possibly have done with his life for those 3 years. And if they don't feel that way, then I will have failed. Not you, he said, I will have failed. So I expect professionalism. I expect a chain of command. I expect you to lead your men and teach the officers. And if I find you're not doing that, I will be in your face immediately. Well, the chiefs just ate this up. It set expectations and a tone they could get behind. It got the crew fired up and ready to work. And there was one more thing. He said there are plenty of sailors out there who didn't have a clue about the name painted on the back of their ship. He said that's not going to be how it is on the Samuel B. Roberts. You see, Rinn was a fervent believer in the power of naval heritage. When I met him about 20 years ago, when I was doing the interviews that would become the book No Higher Honor, he told me, joining the Navy made you aware that you were part of history. You were doing things that people had done before you, and you thought, maybe if I do what they did, it will help me. So when he received his orders to become the prospective commanding officer of the Roberts, he headed for the Navy's archives. He learned that the ship's namesake was a coxswain, a small boat pilot, who gave his life off Guadalcanal to rescue Marines pinned down by fire on the beach. He learned that the first warship, named for Coxswain Roberts, had helped fight off a far superior Imperial Japanese force in the Battle of Leyte Gulf. And so he had the ship's store stocked with the combat memoirs of the captain of that first Roberts. And he invited the survivors of that ship to his ship's commissioning so his crew could meet them. And he encouraged his sailors to learn about their predecessors and about all the brave sailors going back to John Paul Jones. And he told them, you walk in their footsteps. You can be proud of the brave things they did, and you will strive to live up to their example. So Rinn, this was a vital part of forging crew, this pride in heritage and in service and in their jobs. And so, with the help of his officers and the chiefs, the Navy schools all over the country, he began to train his crew. Classes, practice, cross-training, drills. He thought hard about the members of his training teams. So for example, instead of giving the job of damage control assistant to an ensign, common practice back then, he gave it to a lieutenant on his second sea tour. He wanted a confident and experienced DCA, someone who could cut through the welter of daily activities and make sure that there was a DC drill on every watch. Years later, Admiral William Crowe, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, would remark on this. And he would write, from the outset, Commander Paul Rinn emphasized damage control, an area that is often neglected until a unit enters the theater of operations, when it is far too late for rigorous training. Of course, even the best training cannot foresee all possibilities, but it can convey the knowledge necessary to meet the unexpected. Rinn took damage control seriously. He was fond of the saying from the world of golf, you drive for show and you putt for dough. Meaning that the rigorous attention to the less glamorous aspects of an endeavor are often the key to its success. So when the Roberts left for the Gulf, instructors and inspectors all up and down the eastern seaboard agreed there was no better trained frigate in the Atlantic Fleet. Now, the crew of the Roberts, like most Navy ships then and now, was made up largely of 19 and 20-year-olds, most of whom had never been to sea until they crossed the brow of that frigate. But they were trained to a fairly well. And when the mine hit, they reacted as professional sailors. They laid out fire hoses to fight the fires. They began setting up pumps to fight the flooding. But the damage was so severe that many of the things they had been trained to do weren't working. The fire hoses kept losing pressure. The wooden wedges they tried to drive into leaks only split them wider. And so they began to improvise. They used items of clothing to plug the holes in the bulkheads. They strung steel cables to stabilize the deck loose, which had come loose in the explosion. They did 100 other things, and in mortal danger, they reacted not just coolly, not just competently, but creatively. They saved their ship, brought it home to fight again. No one died. Paul Rinn, as you've heard, went on to Major Command, becoming the CEO of a cruiser. The naval tours related to ship survivability, became the executive assistant to a pair of CNOs before retiring as a captain. After his naval service, he worked as a consultant and answered at the beginning the occasional invitation to talk about his experience. But over the years, the story of Paul Rinn and the Roberts spread. Various naval training classes would talk about the lessons it offered. Surface Warfare Officer School would have Rinn up to talk to recent graduates. And after he retired from his civilian job, he put this mentoring into overdrive. And I'd check in with him from time to time, and he was always just back from talking to new COs in Newport, or junior officers in Japan, or even the Chief of Naval Operations, whoever it happened to be at that time. And as you've heard, he ultimately talked to thousands of people over the years, many of whom would see him as an inspiration or even a mentor. Eventually, the Surface Naval Association inducted him into its Hall of Fame. One former destroyer skipper laid out his legacy to me this way. He said, Paul Rinn gave us a template for surface warriors. He said, we're going to practice it until it's perfect, and then we're going to practice it perfectly. Why do we name buildings for people? To honor them, to be sure, but also to remind us of a model to emulate. The heroes of the past offer a path to follow, a standard to meet, a spur to excellence. And it's doubly fitting that the Navy named something for Paul Rinn, who believed so fervently in the power of naval heritage. The center bears the name of Paul Rinn, not just to honor the man who led his crew up to and through their trial by fire, who became an icon and an inspiration to so many in the surface warfare community and beyond, but to remind us, to remind the sailors who passed these doors by the thousands and will pass it in the hundreds of thousands in years to come, that they may one day face their own test, that they had better be ready, and that they walk in the footsteps of people who were. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Pedersen. I know every day when we walk through this building, we'll strive to meet the level of expectation for Captain Rinn. Captain Rinn once said, how you lead, train, and the example you give will determine your success. It is our charge here at Mariner Skills Training Center Atlantic to honor this mentality. With that intention in mind, we will now plot waypoint 1 and prepare to welcome you to Rinn Hall. Pam, Courtney, Kirsten, Captain Baggett, please join us on the stage for the cutting of the ribbon.